Things I forgot to mention in the last video. You can press Ctrl and then a numpad key to go to an orthogonal view that is opposite of the normal one. So this is 1, this is Control 1 on the numpad. I talked about using a mirror modifier for most of my hair, but once I was done with it and I had it applied, and I connected all this stuff, this was like perfectly symmetrical. Then I went in and I just changed these things around a little bit, turning symmetry off, of course. But I just moved these around just a little tiny bit here and there, just to make it less perfectly symmetrical so that it would look a little bit more natural. You can change the color of something you're working with by clicking on it, going down here to Material Properties, and adding a thingy. You gotta you click New, and then you can name it Bow, whatever. And then base color, you can change this to be whatever you want. Why is that not working? Oh yeah, disable use nodes. Fuck, wait, no, yeah. Base color, but it's been a while since I did this. There we go, it's blue. Also, you should probably make sure you're on the material preview mode up here. This can help to distinguish things while you're working on it in the modeling phase, and it will become completely useless once we add texturing right now, so hopefully you listened to me when I told you to watch the rest of this series before proceeding. Decode puts the solidify modifier on clothing when he's modeling them. Don't do that, unless you have a very good reason to. It's very non-optimal in terms of polygon count, which is something we need to keep in mind for games like VRChat. Instead, you can just go into the ridges and manually add in some extra extrusions to make it look like it has a depth to it, but without it actually having depth. You don't want the entire clothing to be two-sided. The only time I'd say you should be able to get away with using a solidify modifier is for pieces of clothing like the hood of a hoodie, where people are going to be seeing both the inside and the outside of it. But you're not going to be seeing the inside of like your sweater, so don't solidify that. By the way, you're probably going to have a lot of questions throughout this series. My advice is to try your best Googling them, as learning how to solve weird, obscure problems on your own is one of the best skills you can have when it comes to this stuff. If you're stumped enough to ask a question in the comments, however, I'll try my best to answer you, assuming YouTube decides to actually show me your questions, and maybe make a pinned comment going over solutions to the problems you're all facing. Alright, so texturing. You see all this stuff up here? These are all the meshes I have. As you can see, there's quite a few of them. Our job now is to combine a bunch of them into a few things, as each object will have its own separate material, and we don't really want 20 materials. You're going to want to group things that are similar in nature to each other. For example, the hair and the ears are going to have pretty much the exact same look, so I'm going to select them both with shift-click and hit Ctrl-J to join them. Who the fuck is calling me? Now you might have noticed a problem arose here. Now why is that? Well, as I went over in the previous video, we need our meshes to have these same modifiers on them. This one has a subdivide modifier. This one has a mirror modifier and a subdivide modifier. Which means we're going to need to apply this mirror, and now they're the same. These numbers, the render and viewport, are the same. These are the exact same modifiers, so now we can join them. This hair down here, probably a good idea to have that be the same object as the rest of the hair. So again, apply modifier, make sure this is the same, and join. Cool, now we got like this, and I'm just going to rename this hair. Gonna combine this with the tail as well. Wait, hold on a second, hang on a second. Subdivide, also the same. Now if, for example, I only had one subdivision thingy on here, I would have to decide, is that alright, or... like, I gotta make these the same, so do I want to add an extra one there, or do I want to get rid of one here? Make sure they're at roughly the same amount of fidelity. If this one is like super low poly, then maybe I would actually apply a subdivide modifier of 1, and then add another one, and have this one be the same as this one up here, have these both be like 1, for example. So now they have the same modifiers on them, but we increase the base poly count of this one. Just be careful doing that. That's not what I ended up doing for this, as the hair and tail were a pretty similar level of detail, so I was fine having them have the same modifier on them. But if you're trying to combine two things that are different levels of detail, that's what you gotta do. Just again, be careful before you apply a subdivide modifier. Like, I know for a fact I'm gonna want more than this in the final model. So, like, if I wanted to apply this subdivide modifier, like, that's fine. I doubt I'm gonna go less than this. Now, essentially what we're doing is we're combining things that are similar in terms of what they are going to look like on the basis of their texture/material. If you plan on doing something fancy, like maybe you're making a slime girl or something, and you want her body to be transparent but her eyes to be a solid color, you should make sure that the parts you want to be transparent should not be part of the same object as the parts you want to be solid. This goes for anything material-based we'll be doing later in Unity. Examples of things that can be done on a per-material basis are transparency, like I said, brightness, the existence of outlines, although that can be finagled a little bit with an outline mask. Basically anything that alters how something looks beyond what is contained within the image of its texture. Anything other than the pixels you're going to be putting onto it. If you want different parts of your model to have differences beyond that, have them be separate objects. Also, try to keep your materials to a minimum for optimization's sake. A lot of the super optimization focused people in VR chat can get away with having just one. You probably don't need to go that far, but you also probably won't need more than like 4. Unless your model is going to have very detailed textures. I personally planned out having 4 materials because of what's called a texture atlas. A texture atlas is basically one image that crams multiple smaller images into it for optimization's sake. It's something that a lot of VR chat guides will tell you to do. My line of thinking was that if I decided to create a texture atlas, it'd theoretically be easy to just put one in each corner of a single image, instead of trying to cram, say, 3 or 5 square images into a single new square image. Other good numbers for this are 9 or 16, as those amounts can also easily be tiled into a square grid. So if you want, you could make a super detailed private use model with 16 separate materials, each corresponding to a different body part, but then merge them all into one for multiplayer games like VRChat, so you're not making everyone else load that many materials whenever you spawn in. For most of you, however, assuming your model is at a similar detail level to mine, 4 materials at a resolution of 2048 by 2048 pixels should be fine. Here is how I ended up merging my meshes. I don't know why I had these all in a separate thingy. I'm actually just gonna drag these all into the same... here we go, I don't do that. Let me run you through them one at a time. First of all, the body. Pretty self-explanatory. Yeah. Then the clothes. Then the face and accessories. Now you might be thinking, wow, this is very little surface area compared to the other ones, what's up with that? Well, it's important for the eyes to have a lot of room on their own. If I take you over to the texture we have right here, you can see the eyes take up a lot of space. Honestly, this is super non-optimal. In fact, I could have had these both, like, I could have had this, like, both of the eyes on one thing. I'll get into how to do that later. And, like, literally so much of this is just a single solid color. Like, all of this white could have been literally 1 pixel. Because, like, the teeth and the bow, I didn't put any texture work on those. Those are just a solid color. So really, if I were to redo this, mayhaps I'd dedicate much less space to like the teeth and the bow and all this other single color stuff. And maybe I would dedicate more room to the clothes. Maybe I wouldn't have both the shirt and pants share the same material, because I do have a slight texture on the pants here. But I ended up grouping them as a combination of both like things that are similar in nature and also just what made sense from like a mesh combination standpoint. It's difficult to explain my reasoning, and I might have ended up doing it differently. Hair makes sense. Hair is just, you know, hair, ears, tail, yeah. I will let you yourself decide how to best merge things in a way that both ensures the merged meshes will be sharing the same type of material. Most likely for most of you, you won't have to worry too much about that unless you're planning on doing something fancy, like I said, with like a transparency or only having outlines in certain parts of the model. So, assuming you don't have to worry about that, you are also going to want to merge things based on space efficiency. You gotta think to yourself, like, hey, there's a lot of surface area here on the clothes. Do I want to just have one image for the texture work here, or maybe do I want multiple? I maybe could have done multiple. I maybe could have, I think in this case it's fine because it's mostly just the shirt here. and it would be kind of weird if the shirt wasn't all on the same texture. So, I don't know. It works for me, it's fine. Like, if you zoom in super far, things start getting a little pixelated, but it's fine. Anyways, I am going to unassign all of the materials from these things and show you how to set all this up yourself. Alright, so here's your model, completely untextured. Now you might already have a material from what I said earlier about, assigning things to be different colors, but what you will not have is these. I'm going to clear all this, clear scene. Now, what our job is right now is to tell this program how we want these things to be unwrapped. Because, as I'm sure you figured out, we're going to need to find some way to assign these polygons onto a flat surface that we can draw onto to give it a texture. Now, if you were to just try to unwrap it how it is, hit A to select all of it, just U for unwrap, and click that. And you head on over to UV editing. There's a little bit of extra work you're going to have to do first. I am actually going to not go over this with the clothes. I'm going to use the body instead, both because this will be simpler and also because, well, as I stated in the previous video, I kind of screwed up by modeling in clothing folds when I shouldn't have, but the general body will be a very good indicator of how to do this. So I'm going to clear everything I have here, pin all these things that I so painstakingly set up, and yeah, we try to unwrap this now. Oh, it doesn't even seem to want to unwrap actually, so let's go over how to do it properly. Something like this is what we're going to be aiming for, but just ignore that. Now there's a couple ways to do this. One way is called project from view. You hit U, project from view, and wow, there's all of the polygons just laid out right there. You're gonna not want to do it like this though. I'll show you an example of one way you can do it. Hands are a pretty good example. I'm going to select the top half of the hand, and as you can see, I am trying to follow this line right here, this center line separating the top and the bottom. Hopefully your topology is similar to this, in a way that makes sense at the very least. Now things get a little weird around the thumb. I might just exclude the thumb from this, honestly. Just focus on the palm for now. We can have the thumb as a separate thing, perhaps. But as you can see, there we go, selected all of it. Now we can line our camera up with this, like so. And then hit U to project from view. And we have this hand. Well, the top half of it at least. Then we would do the same for the bottom half. Could probably just invert selection and then, well, I'm not actually sure that makes it any easier than deselect, And once you had that all set out, you could go over to this relax tool right here. Press N to open this. I can access its properties and increase the radius. And Maya is a lot better at this. Oh, looks like I missed a spot there. Whoops. So yeah, this is one way you can do it. I'm sure it'll be useful in certain things, particularly very flat parts. You would go through your whole model and make separate selections based on that. But what I did for the entire model, instead of doing that, I used a different method in which we mark seams. Now, I'm going to go over the basics of how this works. If you want more information, continue watching Dicko's series as he goes into texturing. And honestly, most of what I am going to be saying here will just be repeating him. We're basically going to be marking parts of our model to give the program an idea of where it should cut our polygons for the UV unwrap. So I'm going to select this edge loop, right click, mark seam. And then I'm going to go down here, and instead of going down to the bottom of the leg here, I'm actually going to put it here. The reason for this is I want my character to have socks on. And it's very easy and also very graphically optimal, shall we say, to texture not just based on how you're drawing your pixels, but where your UVs are marked. If I mark this right here, then we'll have a couple of cylinders for the legs right here. Also, if you select something and you press Ctrl L, there's a mode here to set it to seam. I could do it normally, but this makes it easy to select things like this. Now, there is a cylinder projection option. I don't know if I trust that though. So instead, I'm just gonna mark a couple extra lines. Do it up to here. Oh, right, this only works in this selection mode. control click, I believe. Select one thing and then control click. There we go. Make sure we get all the way up there. Mark that seam. Select mirror selection. Mark that seam. Cool. Now if you access your mind's eye and you visualize how this is gonna work, we have a cylinder here, but this is the part where it can split apart. So we're gonna select this and hit unwrap. And you can see it starts here. I can actually click this and it'll show us like where we are relative. Ignore that, but it starts here and then it goes around like that. You can see it. And eventually gets to the edge right here. Now I'm gonna do another thing for the foot. I'm gonna mark this right here. And I'm going to choose a point that we're going to separate the top of the foot from the bottom of the foot. I'm just gonna do it right here. This is the upper part of the sock right here, so we're going to, of course, also want that marked. But I'm doing it like this because this part up here is still a cylindrical tube, but at this point it stops being a tube, and it makes more sense to kind of, not entirely sure if this is ideal, but it works. So again, I'm just going to select those bits, Control L, don't forget the bottom of the feetsies, and unwrap that, and there. Now I'm going to make an actual image. I'm going to click New here. I'm going to use a 2048 by 2048 resolution. Pretty standard. I'm just going to name this like tutorial body. I don't think it generally matters whether or not you have alpha enabled, unless you're planning on using, or specifically not using, transparency, and I don't know. If you're confused, listen to Dicko, he knows more about this than I do. But well, look at that, we got an image. If I move this a little bit and we go to, oh, we're already on texture mode, right? What we need to do is make a material for this, if we haven't already. I'm gonna name this body, whatever. So it has a material, but this material is just kind of nothing. We gotta assign it our image. If you don't see this use node section, go up over to render properties and make sure you're on Eevee. Then for base color, you can click this little circle here, click image texture, and you have to actually assign your thing right here. Now, of course, this is all black because we haven't done anything with it yet, but we can head on over to texture paint, and if we start drawing on it, would you look at that? Now, if we want to be more precise, however, let's go into edit mode here. I'm going to select the thighs, Control L, and go back into texture paint, enable this paint mask. Then we can just take our paint bucket tool and get like whatever color we want. It's nice flesh. And oh wait, no, you gotta click on this. That's right. Now it's bleeding into the rest of the stuff because it's all like the UVs are all sorts of fucked up on everywhere except for here. Just ignore that. I am far paler than that. Who am I kidding? There we go. And now at the socks right here, we can go into edit mode and select these bits. Back in texture paint. Ah, I see that my UVs are overlapping each other because I'm dumb. I kind of skipped several steps here just to, I'm trying to demonstrate to you why we have this seam here. I'm just going to, here, select everything that we worked on so far, and then hit unwrap again. There we go. Alternatively, if I didn't want to do that, I could go over here, select all of these, click UV, click Pack Islands. And it does the same thing without having to re-unwrap it, which you might want to avoid sometimes. Now you can go on to texture paint. Quickly redo what I just did for the thighs. Go down, select all of the sock areas. Get a nice solid white, maybe a little bit of purple there or whatever. Click on that. Bam. And you'll see that we have this perfect seam right here. There are no jaggedy pixels right here. I can zoom in as much as I want. It's like a vector. Perfectly smooth line. Whereas, if we hadn't done that, let me quickly do it the wrong way. Let's say we didn't have this seam right here. And we were to unwrap all of this. Now we go over to texture paint, color in those socks again with this weird purpley color. And then we get a skin tone for the thighs. Alright, so now we have the feet and the legs separated. However, we want our socks to come up here. Well, what we have to do now, we can press S anywhere on screen to select that color. So I'm gonna select the sock color. And now we have to actually draw this on. I can turn this mask off. You can see it filling out right here. We can also do it right here if we want. Gotta do it on both legs. But because this is now texture work as opposed to UV work, it's not a perfect seam. I can use a harder brush by going down here and like, this should be perfectly jaggedy pixels, yeah. But look at that. You zoom in, you see the pixels! It is always better when texturing to rely on UV placement rather than actual texture work in order to get the smoothest possible textures. Why draw in this seam yourself when you can have it specifically marked by where these polygons are? Alternatively, you could always select this face loop, and this one right here, go to texture paint, turn the mask back on, and whoops, do it like that. But this is still not good enough, because it's still, like, you can see the pixels here have to go diagonally, because it was still trying to change from one color to the other on the same UV thing. You don't have to do it like that, you can just have these two things separated. So, you know, keep that in mind while you're marking all your seams, but for now, just go ahead and mark them. This is the setup I ended up having. This was me following Dicko's tutorials, of course. So I'll just give this a quick turnaround if you want to study where specifically I marked all of these seams. Now for most of the base body here, doesn't really matter trying to delineate things because it's all just going to be flesh colored. The socks, however, I knew from the start this was going to be on the same mesh as the actual skin, the body, because, well, I didn't exactly model in my toes here, so that's why I knew I was going to have a thing there. Got the neck going into the head right here. Got my whole face separated out. The eyes right on the ridge. Mouth right here. And the torso is separated into front and back. There's a line right here, completing that loop. And I did, I believe, the exact same pattern for the clothes. More or less. The pants, instead of having a cylindrical thing, I separated them into front and back. Don't entirely remember why, but I mean, it works. And then the torso, I actually did the opposite. I had this be a cylindrical unwrap with only one seam right here. I just figured that would probably make my life a little bit easier when it comes to texturing in the stripes, if it could all be one continuous thing, rather than splitting it into two separate UV maps. And we also have seams around areas in which the color is going to change. So there's going to be a lavender stripe down here, but I know all of these little collar areas are going to be solid white, including down here and down here. So same methodology I did with the socks. These straps here are kind of just like very long cubes almost. Here, let me change the crease to 0 on all those just so we can actually see. Turn off subdivide. This is actually super weird. You probably shouldn't do it like this, but it didn't matter for me because I knew it was just going to be a solid color, so whatever. Let me again clear the crease in all of these so you can just see the red lines. Pretty self-explanatory for most of these, like eyes separated into front and back. The eyebrows and the eyelashes these are actually kind of how an actual cube would be. Because you got like this back section right here, but then for the front section, you need a line so that the tip, this edge can kind of unfold itself. Same for right here, so that this part can bend over like whoosh, and then this part come out like whoosh. Same for the teeth, it's just a matter of getting it geometrically like feasible. Tongues just top and bottom. Collar is just an inside and outside with a seam right here so that it can unfurl. Pretty self-explanatory. This part's a little weird, but you just gotta think three-dimensionally. Think about how you're gonna like just grab this and just pull it apart. Use the bow. Got that cube pattern right here. And the hair. You know, once again, I wish I had advice. Let me hide the unnecessary parts. I just did the inside and outside for this actually. If you can imagine like kind of taking a wig and setting it down flat on the ground That's what the outer area is for this. You look at my UV. Yeah, it's pretty weird looking, but this is what I ended up with. These little weird spots right here are where these little spikes sticking out. And it's very likely your hair is going to look very different from mine. So you're gonna have to figure out how to do that yourself. But this is what worked for this particular style where it's all connected in one big blob mesh. There might be better ways of doing it, but that's how I did it. Tail was a little annoying trying to get proper. I ended up separating it into several pieces. You got, well, it's not that complicated, I guess. I have a left and a right side, and then these extra little bits coming off of it. You can see this gap right here is where one of these pieces go. And I had those be their own separate thing because they're kind of like overlapping it. So yeah, go ahead, get all your scenes marked up. Once you're ready, hit A. We'll go UV editing, and then go ahead and unwrap all of that. Now, it's very unlikely you're gonna want to go with what it gives you. There's a couple settings you can mess with right here, such as the margin, how much space you have between things. Generally want to set this relatively low without it being like ridiculous. Just give yourself a little bit of room to work with, so that once you're painting a texture or whatever, you don't accidentally go over and hit the other thing. But now comes the process of arranging this in such a manner as to be reasonable. You can ask yourself, how much fidelity do I want for all these parts? This is my face. I probably want it to be able to take up more pixels. I don't want it to take up like this little of an area. I'm gonna hit S to make that bigger. I'm on this island select thing right here, by the way. It selects the entire section. Put this over here. And you're probably also going to find it a lot easier if you rotate it into a manner in which it is sitting properly. But it's not going to be perfect, so what you got to do is go to Edge Select, select an edge loop right here and here. SX0 with proportional editing off. Alright, press P. Pin those in place. Now when you unwrap it again, it'll unwrap based on how that is. So like, even if we were to have all this in a weird position, as long as we have these pinned vertices right here, once we unwrap it again, everything is going to go around those the best that it can manage. And now it's perfectly straight. I will also end up doing that for the torso here, and a couple other things. I will also make the torso smaller. Because, I mean, I'm going to end up deleting all of this anyway. We really don't need it to take up that much space. In fact, the only things that are really going to be visible are the feet, face, and hands. Now, the face and hands are pretty important parts, so you want those to be bigger. The feet can also be very important parts, depending on your tastes. So I'm going to get everything roughly to the size that I want it, based on how important I think things are. Hands are pretty important, face is very important. And then what I can do is, instead of re-unwrapping it, because I was just gonna resize everything to have it wants it to be, we can select all, and hit UV, Pack Islands. And we can disable its ability to rotate things, so that it keeps everything in the manner that we wanted it to be when we pinned all those vertices. I knew it was gonna happen one day. And as with the seam markings, I will now show you what I ended up with in terms of my finalized UV setup. Well, almost finalized. This is from an earlier version before I merged some of my meshes, and the face here is a little different, but I will go into that in a little bit. Otherwise, this is all the same. Face, of course, big and important, front and foremost. Hands, also important. I really didn't need the body to be that large, but yeah. And I also just organized these in terms of like where they are. Like, these are the upper thighs, these are the starts of the socks, these are the arms, I believe, and the feet. Now, here's the thing. I could have done twice as good as this, because you see, I don't currently have a mirror modifier on here, but I probably should, because if I did, let me just quickly delete half the body. I turn on this so I can select through things. And... almost. Alright. 1/2 of the body. Get it mirrored. This should probably come first. And I notice that the textures are still working just fine, even though I deleted half the body. That's because, well, we don't actually need more than half the body. We have this face right here, but if I were to, say, apply this mirror modifier now, I'm going to disable this so it doesn't select multiple things that are in the exact same spot, and yet it's still doing that for some reason. Oh right, I gotta turn off proportional editing. Nope, still doing it, but we do have like... yeah, okay. We have two things directly on top of each other here. It's just being weird for some reason. I think I like select links with that. Nope. Well, you know, I actually can't find how to easily select and separate this aside from moving each individual little... Though if I were to select this, enable this... rather, select linked here, and unwrap this again, you will see we do have two halves here, they're just inside of each other. And that is fine, unless you want there to be some sort of difference. And look at all this extra space I have now. I should have done this from the beginning, but I didn't. Because I only need to use half of everything, I could have, like, way more room. I mean, alright, so with the mirror modifier still there, not applied yet, we can unclick this and, whoops. Well, we could do that, or we could select all of these, hack islands, and look at how much extra space we have to work with. Just ignore that. Obviously this would need to be retextured, but free extra resolution at no cost. Again, assuming your texture is fine being perfectly symmetrical. If not, well, you're going to want to apply your mirror modifier beforehand, and then unwrap and have it be the way I had it before. Here is how my hair is set up. Again, a lot of this wasn't totally necessary, but I did like to align things just for my own convenience and, I guess, sense of neatness. That's why you got all these pinned vertices around here. Here is the face accessories area. Again, I am telling you how to do things better than I did them. I could have just had this be mirrored and it would have been fine. Well, this bow isn't symmetrical, so I wouldn't have been able to apply a mirror modifier to this whole object. In that case, I think what I would have done was... well, there's a couple things. I could have maybe had this bow be a separate object while initially unwrapping. Then I could have had everything mirrored properly and then merged the bow into it and added its unwrap area to everything else. Or I could have just grabbed this and slid it into the exact same location as that. It's exactly the same. You might notice these weird square things up here. This is the bell area. I made it like this because I thought I was going to do some weird thing with outlines that I didn't actually end up doing. I'll get into that when I talk about the eye outline, but it ended up not being necessary for me to square it out like that. Oh no, wait, this is the bow, isn't it? Yeah, that's the bow, this is the bell. And of course I got this seam right here because I want the inside of the bell to be dark, and that's what this is right here. You can see again, using UV seams as opposed to texture work. Perfect line right there, separating the two colors. And the clothes! As I said in the previous part, I spent a lot of time setting up this shirt area to be very square, and again, I might have had an easier time if I didn't model in the clothing folds already, because I could have used something like... let me use this as an example. What is this? This is the, one of the straps right here. I'm gonna clear that pin I got on it and re-unwrap it. And this is what it ends up looking like. Kinda ugly. But I have a plugin called UV Squares. I don't remember this as a default Blender thing or not, but if you just Google Blender plugin UV Squares, you can find it pretty easily, figure out how to install it. Click to grid by shape. Turn that off. Then click to grid by shape. And well, that's a little weird actually. Alright, it's because I didn't unwrap that properly. Okay, it'll probably work on this though. Re-unwrap just that part. Bam. Ugly. 2 grid by shape. Fucking, 2 grid by shape. There, it's a reasonable looking thing now. And that can help with laying all these things out in a non-stupid way. Now to talk about the actual texturing part of, well, the texturing part. Check this out. You see how all of these lines are perfectly horizontal? That was done very intentionally. If you look at this Guilty Gear video I mentioned again, look at this weird ass texture they got where everything's all like blocky and stuff. This was done very intentionally. This is because if you were to draw on this line, like just draw that curve onto the texture, well, let me show you what happens if you draw a curve. Alright, I'm gonna draw a line. Alright, that's cool, and I'm gonna zoom in. Oh no, it's all pixely. But what happens if I draw a perfectly horizontal line? There's no pixels. Whoa! We can abuse this fact. If we only use perfectly horizontal and perfectly vertical lines, then when we zoom in, no matter how far we zoom in, these are still going to look very, very solid. They're not going to have any jagged pixels. So you don't want to draw your texture around your UV, you want to move your UV around your texture. Also, in case it's not obvious, I did not make this texture in Blender. Blender is a modeling program, it is not an image editing software. What I actually ended up doing was I went into Texture Paint, and I selected all of the torso areas. Now use that texture mask thingy, and I just filled in a color. Then I saved this image, and I opened it in my image editing software of choice, which in my case is Clip Studio Paint. Very good program, by the way. It's only $50. It's better than Photoshop and Paint Tool SAI. Highly recommended. And then I went in and I saw, oh, okay, well, this is where I gotta draw all the stuff. So I'd look at this and I would know, okay, I need to have the stripes starting here and ending here, and that's what I did. And to make them perfectly spaced out, like, in case you couldn't figure it out yourself, just make a line right there. Make a, well, copy paste that one actually, moving up a little bit. And just merge those layers, copy paste that one, move those like that, and so on. And then, you know, I'd have that big black blob over here marking where I need these things to be, so I could just, boop. And, you know, align them to the proper height. Here's my Clip Studio file. Let's see if I can run you through this layer by layer. At the top we got my references, and don't think I ended up using that. Just simple little drawings. I used vector layers for this, because that meant I could go in and change it around like this however I wanted to get it just right, and even change the line width at certain areas by doing this. Clip Studio is such a good program. Okay, I can't actually run you through this layer by layer because I am the sloppiest person in the world when it comes to organizing my layers, and so many of these are like outdated and but pretty basic. I put like a slight texture over some of these. Drawing paper texture, 25%. This is 100%, that's too much. Just to give it a nice fuzzy kind of sweater feel. And this piano up here, this was a little tricky trying to make. I got this picture of an actual piano, and I tried to line it up in such a manner that I could conceivably look at these things and see like a pixel width that was consistent. It is confusing. I don't know how I did it. I'm not really a graphic designer. But then I would go back in, click image, and reload, after of course saving it in Clip Studio as PNG and overwriting the original that I had saved, exported out of this program. Oh, by the way, any image work that you do inside of Blender, you need to make sure you click on the image up here and you save it if you do want to save it. It doesn't automatically get saved whenever you save your file. You have to save all of your images separately, so keep that in mind, please. And my piano collar perfectly loops around in a seamless way. You can't tell where it starts and ends. I can show you where it starts and ends though. It's right here. I went ahead and I intentionally lined this up in such a way that it starts and ends right on a C note. Well, the line separating a B from a C. So, you know, originally I had this mess to work with after unwrapping it, but UV squares came in handy. I went ahead and did that, rotated it 90 degrees exactly, slid it on up here. That is upside down, and I rotate it 180 degrees. Try to get this lined up to where I want it to be. right around there. Then I took this line, slid this up a little bit. You know, you just need to decide how you want to lay these out. Actually, I'm gonna raise this all up. I'm just manipulating the UV to get it to look proper on your model. And you can see at the seam here, it's not working properly. Well, that just means I need to take this and line it up to where I want it to be. However, you can see it's only moving this one part of it. So that's, you know, we don't want that to be like super tiny or super long or whatever. So if I remember correctly, I believe I just ended up scaling it along the X and doing that, looking at the right edge and the left edge here, making sure that this right edge is roughly around the in between of the B and C. Press G and then X to move this to the left on the X a little bit. And this is like close enough, so I'm just going to grab this, make sure proportional lighting's on, move this a little bit. Scroll that up so that we get some more influence, and there you go. However, it's looking a little distorted, ironically enough, because this right here is not distorted, whereas the original topology kinda is. You can see these bits are all sort of crooked a little bit here and there. You know, it's not perfectly uniform like this perfect square grid is right here. So for that, what I did was I pinned in place the important bits. That is this bottom line, this top line, P, this edge, and this edge. Then I re-unwrapped it. And I kind of, for the most part, just let it do what it wants. I might have pinned a couple extra lines than that, actually, like this one, maybe. No, that kind of messes with it a lot. Oh, you know what I might have done, actually? This method of pinning a couple of things in place and then re-unwrapping it and letting it do what it wants to the rest of it, that does work for certain things. I believe I ended up doing that a lot for the shirt here. You can see these lines are not at all uniform, only around the edges. So I would pin these important edges in place and re-unwrap the shirt. For this, however, what we may want to do, or what we may have to do, and I don't even remember what I did, but I'm assuming this was probably it, is instead of using UV squares, just pin it like this. Well, scale that to Y, make sure this is off, Y0, SY0, then re-unwrap it again. Okay, this edge is gonna need to be perfectly like that though, so I'm gonna do that and pin that. Same over here, SX0, P to pin, re-unwrap it again. And now we have this grid where we're still letting it do what it wants in the middle, but the edges where it matters are exactly how we want them. And now I would do what I told you to do again, and it would look a little bit more how it should. Now the eyes here were a bit annoying. Ignore these blue lines. I don't entirely know why those appear. It has something to do with face normal editing, which I'll get to in a little bit. And see, I wanted my eyes to have an outline around the whole thing, because that's kind of just how I like drawing things. I like having an outline around the whole thing instead of just the top. And I did have the eyelash sort of mesh at the top, but I also wanted to go all around on the texture. Now originally I just drew it on with these circular eyes, how it wanted to be unwrapped, but it didn't look that good. So instead I set this up. Again, perfectly vertical and horizontal lines means no jaggedy pixels around curves. I could have saved myself a lot of trouble if this was properly mirrored and I only did one side, but I picked a corner of where I think things should start getting set up, and I just kind of got to work squarifying all of this to be right and proper, and I had to move things around a little bit here and there. Like up here you see it's not the same as the other. That's because, why is that actually? I don't remember, but there's probably a reason for it. But yeah, if I went and cleared this pin, and re-unwrap this, this is what it originally was, and I just had to think, okay, this is gonna be one corner, this is gonna be another corner. So I'm gonna go from here to here, set that to 0 on the X, pin that in place, you know. And I would do that for this whole inner layer, and then I would re-unwrap it with those pin things so that I could let it do its thing a little bit, fill in this gap right here. And I did that across a couple different layers and this outer ring right here. Because I believe if this outer ring was not pinned in place, what does it want to do? It wants to do that. You see down here, this like transparent thing? You can see an artifact over here corresponding to that. That's because this is like, things are overlapping each other, so I had to move this out of the way a little bit. So I ended up pinning those in place where I wanted them to be. But yeah, that's how you get perfectly non-pixelated lines on your textures. I think it's definitely worth the extra work. I almost forgot to mention. You might be wondering how specifically I did this texture work, where... Oh. I appear to have missed a spot. Okay, I wasn't planning on showing this, but if you have a scenario like this where, like, you know this is supposed to be over here, Shift W to weld them together. But anyways, you could go over to Texture Paint, just kinda draw stuff on however you want here. But as I said, Blender is not an image editing program, it is a modeling program. You'll probably find it a lot easier to use an image editing program, or a 3D modeling image editing program, such as Substance Painter or Armor Paint. Personally, however, I did not use either of those. What I did was, I went up here, Export UV Layout. Now, we can open that up in our image editing software of choice. And look at that. So here's what I did. I had this solid base color texture, and I imported the UV layout, and I just went ahead and drew over it in the places that I figured were roughly the right areas. And once I was done with that, just hid that layer and exported it. Went back in Blender, image, reload. Assuming I saved it as the same file, like I overwrote the hair base color file. But if you prefer to paint directly on your model, Substance Painter or Armor Paint might be more up your alley. Also, I believe when I initially unwrapped this... Ooh. Yeah, it ended up looking a lot different. This is where I use the Relax tool to kinda make things a bit more reasonable. I believe I actually just pretty much went over the whole thing. Yeah, a little bit. Because there were spots that were overlapping each other. You see that right there? That's what the Relax tool's for. Just chill out a little bit. You do not want your UVs overlapping unless you're doing some like mirror thingy like I explained earlier. Or if you have like a single solid color where like, again, I could have easily taken all of these UVs and just put them all in the same spot in the same color, and it would have been fine because it's just a solid color. If my voice sounds weird right now, it's because I literally just woke up and I remembered, oh, I forgot to go over something important. What I also forgot to mention is, after you're done with all this UV unwrapping texturing stuff, then you can go in and model your clothing folds, and it should probably work fine. Or alternatively, you can do normal mapping for them, which I don't know how to do. I think Dicko goes over it in his tutorial series. Or you can just texture on clothing folds. I've drawn little shadows where they should be. You see this with a lot of VTuber models, if you feel like your model needs clothing folds, of course. Back to the other Mako. By the way, if you look at my actual texture, you'll see a couple things. Obviously I drew this on manually. I also manually drew in the eyeshadows. However, all this little soft texture work right here, you know, this little pink glow, I did not draw that in. I auto-generated that using a method Dicko goes over in his texturing phase of his series. So I'm gonna let you watch that if you want to be able to do that. But you ended up with something a little bit like this mess down here. I think this is the right one. It might have been this one. I don't remember. It's probably this one though. There's several things here that aren't actually like what you gotta worry about. We got this pointiness thing. Adding some red to it. We also have this ambient occlusion thing. These are the colors that I set up for my skin tones. You got this at the brightness, this down here. And I'm not going to go into how to actually set this up because it's super complicated. I barely understand it, and Dicko does a pretty good job at it. I'm bringing it up because it is something I did for my model, and it's something I ran into a problem of when doing it. Here's the thing. Whenever I would render my thing out, I ended up having these super dark shadows. Things were way darker than I wanted them to be. Underneath the hands here, like, they'd be super dark and red, and it would look really weird, because it's like, well, I don't want that to always be dark. I want it to be the same general shade as this. I only want the, like, darker red areas to be in areas kind of in between, like, in between my fingers right here. That's a good spot for that. And I discovered it's the bake type. You gotta set this to emit if you don't want that to happen. If you go up to render paths up here, you can look at the different things that it is baking into the texture whenever you click bake. All I wanted it to do was the ambient occlusion one. All the ambient occlusion does is generate shading based on where light is unlikely to hit, but it's not generating from like an actual light source. So all those places like underneath your chin, between your fingers, like underneath your arm, between it and your torso, those kinds of areas, it'll generate shading there. You may want to disable other meshes from affecting this by disabling the render icons on them over here. If I disable the clothes from render, you can now see the clothes are no longer affecting the ambient occlusion of the body, which may or may not be what you want. The hair is something I definitely disabled because the hair was going to be going all over the place. I didn't want a static piece of shading on my face based on where the hair is right now. That would have looked really weird. However, my bake was baking in more than just the ambient occlusion. It was baking in a bunch of other stuff that you can see if you click on the combined paths. I wasn't just doing the stuff down here with the pointiness and the ambient occlusion. It was also doing all this stuff through the principled BSDF node. This adds a whole bunch of other stuff for like more realistic shading. I did not want any of that. So instead of running everything through the principled BSDF and then plugging that into my material output node, like it is by default, I just moved that out of the way and plugged everything directly into the material output, just bypassing the BSDF entirely. And then I made sure the bake type is set to emit, because emission is like just basic without all the other bullshit. And then I hit bake, and then I got my base like flesh tones that I put all the extra textures on top of. Well, actually, I started with the texture. I started, what is it, body base color? Yeah, I started with this. These are all the colors for my body right there, and you can see it's at the beginning of the chain right here. And I plug that into the color for this thingy right here. So then it applies all that stuff, not just to a single flesh tone, but the actual texture I want, which includes the socks. And then it would like generate weird things for the eyeballs, and I had to go back into Clip Studio and set this part to be all white again, of course, because you don't want shading inside of your eyeballs. Whoa, what the fuck? So that is a method to automatically generate a sort of shading onto your texture, in which you directly bake in colors to the texture itself. Now, that leads me to the next point, which is shading in general. When it comes to shading, you have three options. First option is to do nothing, but I probably wouldn't recommend that. Second option is to use a shader in programs like Unity down the line. A shader automatically generates shadows based on positioning of your character's body parts. For example, look at my hand right here. You can see the shadows coming in and out, semi-realistically, as if there's a light source directly up there. It's all being done automatically. Alternatively, you can directly color in shading onto your textures, the same way you would do it for a drawing. The closest I came to doing this was that ambient occlusion shader node setup thingy in Blender that I just went over, that Dicko goes into more detail about in his videos. But it's very minor, and it's mostly just to add a little bit of texture to the skin in certain places where light is unlikely to reach ever. You can see between my fingers, you know, it's just that little bit of redness underneath my neck as well. I also did a little bit of texture work on my hair. I guess this can technically be considered a form of drawn-on shading. I don't really know what I'd call it exactly. It's kind of like a cross between highlights and just extra texture work, I don't know. But other than that, everything on my model is pretty much just a solid color, plus the little extra details like music notes on my shirts or little rings in my eyes. So obviously, a benefit of using the shader method is you need to do significantly less work. I didn't have to draw in all the shadows on this entire model. It'll also look accurate in any position. The shadows are always on the underside of my arms and my hands, no matter what direction I turn them. You don't get this with drawing in your own shading. If you have an arm and you draw in shadows like down there, then well, once you turn your arm upside down, you're going to see the shadows on top of it. You can see this in certain clips of VTubers like Kazuna Eye, for example. You get more accuracy with a generated shader. However, it may end up looking too accurate and make your face look weird, but there is a workaround for this. So in summary, pros for using a shader: you don't have to do as much texturing work, you get accurate adaptive shadows at all angles. The pros of manually texturing in your shading, however, you get more artistic control over it. You get to make them look however you want. You also have slightly less work you have to do in Blender or Unity. You know, just in case you feel like you've had enough of this by then. We will go over how to set up shaders in a later part, once we start importing our model into Unity, but we're going to have to preempt that with something. I mentioned that shaders can be too accurate for stylized models, and they can make the face end up looking weird. You can see that in this earlier version of my Miniaxel model before I knew what I was doing. Just too many shadows on the face, it just doesn't look right. However, we can prevent that with custom normals. What is a normal? You can go down here in edit mode and enable them. This is the normal. A normal is basically data that tells the program which direction a particular face is facing. Normally, this is pretty self-evident. This face is facing that way. That face is facing that way. And shadows will be generated according to that. However, because we have so many different faces facing different directions on the, well, face, we kind of have more data than we want. Like, look at all of this. Look at all these different little changes in direction. There's gonna be so many little annoying shadows just going like all over the face. But this is anime, damn it, or, well, I don't know if this counts as anime, but close enough. Point is, this is a stylized toon/anime model. We want the face to be nice and shadow-free for the most part. Well, let me show you how to fix that. Add a plane. Rotate this plane 90 degrees. Along the X. That's important. Position it over here a little bit. Go to edit mode. Add a couple of lines here. Well, make sure it is an odd number of lines so you have a center line to pull out. Grab that center line. Proportional editing mode. Move it outwards in the shape that you want shadows to be treating your face as. So something like this, I think, is pretty good. This should probably be smaller. Like, still bigger than your entire face. That's probably important to make sure. But, yeah, something a little bit like this. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Bring it back just a bit. Alright, I'm gonna name this, face plane, whatever. Now I'm gonna go to my body mesh and add a data transfer modifier. Source object, face plane. Enable face corner data. Click custom normals. You'll notice nothing happened, and it's telling us to enable auto smooth and object data properties, so let's go do that. That's down here under normals, auto smooth. And would you look at that? Our shading just dramatically changed. Now if I rotate this around the Z, this plane, you'll notice the lighting on our model also changing. If I rotate it this way, it's acting as if all of the normals are facing in this direction. There might be conflicts with the subdivision surface modifier based on where this is in the list, so be mindful of that. But anyways, we can just hide this now and disable it from any renders. Now the problem is this is affecting our entire mesh. We don't want that, we just want the face. So I'm going to click on our body mesh, go to object data properties down here again. Under vertex groups, make a new one. Name it like face normal, that is, whatever. Go edit mode. I'm gonna disable viewing normals because it's distracting. Now I'm going to select everything on the face that I want to be affected by this. That will include the eyes, everything inside these eye sockets. Remember, we're just taking something that is already mostly flat and making it act like it's even flatter. So I don't want this part down here. The cutoff should be right there, seems good, as it's changing down to becoming the underside of the chin. Actually, it can help if I select these face loops around the eyes and mouth. And we'll also do it right here. Alright, something like this should be good. Then we simply click Assign. Now if we deselect this and we click on this vertex group again, we click Select, it'll select our vertex group, which is this. Now if we go back into our modifiers, we can specify a vertex group to have this effect only. There we go. Rest of the body is fine, but our face is now properly facing in one direction. However, what you may want to do, and what I personally did, is exclude the nose area from this. And in order to do that, we're going to go on over to weight paint mode, something we will be struggling with in the future when it comes to the rigging phase. But for now, I find that this mode makes it a lot easier. I'm going to click up here, go to Subtract, make our brush radius a bit bigger. Now everything in red here is part of our vertex group, and everything in blue is not. But we can also have things be in between. Also, you can enable symmetry on this tool icon right here, under X. Actually, that's happening without it even being on. Can't really tell you why. But anyways, we're just gonna give a little area where it's not gonna be affected. Right around here. We go into a mix brush to, well, we're gonna need to set that strength to, let's try half. And blend it in a little bit more. Yeah, something a bit like this should probably work for our purposes. Now we can see now. Well, that's a little weird. So let's go back and continue subtracting from that area until we get something that looks fairly normal. I mean, it's gonna look a little weird because of this, you know, Blender's default smooth shading. But I think that'll probably work. Let me actually go in and show you what I specifically ended up with. Ah, I see, okay, so this is what I ended up with. I actually didn't go fully blue here, rather just a little bit of green and then some yellow. I also smoothed out the transition here a little bit on the edges. Yeah, something like this suited me just fine. This is only if you want your nose to have shading on it, even if the rest of your face is all facing the same direction, which I personally did. I think it looks pretty good. If we head on over to Unity, I will of course go over all of this stuff in a later part. We can actually see the difference immediately. There's this import setting where if you leave it off, things don't work right. Look what happens when I activate a blend shape and I open my mouth. See those shadows? Let me change the position of the light. Yeah. See, that looks ugly as hell. Like, not just that curve there, but you see around the lips right there? No. You don't want that. We want it to be normal, like this. And the fix for that is as simple as going here and making sure Legacy Blend Shape, whatever that says, I can't see it, and making sure that's on. And then when we go in and we change the shape key, it'll behave. But you can see no matter the camera angle, our shading looks normal now. It like very gradually kinda spins around because we set it up to function that way. And you can see the nose shadows coming into play where the rest of the face doesn't. I think it looks pretty good. Here's what it looks like without the custom face normals. Ugh. Now there's one other aspect of the visuals that I need to go over, and that is outlines. However, this is very much a sort of final step kind of thing. It's something that is done either in Unity or in Blender after you're done like the whole other rest of your model. So I will actually be going into that in what will probably be the last part. Now they are of course completely optional. I will show you what my model looks like without them real quick. There. This is what I would look like minus outlines. But I think the outlines add a lot. I sort of made a concerted effort to make this model look as two-dimensional as possible, both with the outlines, which are generated in Unity, or in Blender. This right here, on this model, this is the VRM version of the model, the one I'm using in this program right now. This is set up a little different, I'll get into that later. But we have the outlines around the thing, which are the same color as these outlines separating the stripes of the sweater, and the collar, and the eyelashes, and it all just kind of comes together to give it a nice 2D feel. You know, this is fine over here, but this is how wowza. It's all dependent on your style. So I will go into that among many other things at a later date, but first, we need to get to rigging. We will talk about that in the next part. This video ended up being a lot longer than I expected it to be. Hopefully that's been to your benefit and not to your annoyance, but the actual process of texturing should not take nearly as long as modeling. So have fun with that, and we will see you in the not so fun part.